Hello, my name is Michael Hunter Schwartz, and I'm the Dean of the McGeorge School of Law. I'm sitting here with Michael Vitiello, the Associate Dean for Scholarship and a Distinguished Professor at the McGeorge School of Law. Professor Vitiello is a nationally recognized expert on criminal law, sentencing policy, and marijuana law. He is the author of over 15 books and over 90 law review articles. In his most recent book, he offers a measured overview of the successes and failures of the victims' rights movement. His book, The Victims' Rights Movement, What It Gets Right, What It Gets Wrong, was published by a fancy publisher, NYU University Press, in July of 2023. For those of you who are former students of his, you will recognize his balanced and thoughtful approach to everything in this book. Professor Vitiello, what led you to this project?
I got an invitation to present a paper at New York University Law School in honor of my criminal law teacher who had left Penn to go to NYU. And I was trying to figure out how I should put together all of the work that I had done. And suddenly I realized I'd been writing about the victims' rights movement for 30 years or more.
So you ended up writing a law review paper that then you expanded in?
Yes. I ended up doing the paper about the victim impact statements. And then, of course, that just kept going. And the more I read about the victims' rights movement, the more ideas I got, put together a book proposal, and happily NYU accepted it.
It seemed like this was a work of passion because it seemed like a minute from the time you told me you got a book contract to the time it was in print.
Yeah.
How fast did you do this?
Well, again, partly because I'd written in the field before, I was able to write fairly quickly. And the other thing is, thanks to you and Mary Beth Moylan, the Associate Dean, I had a reduced teaching load for a semester where I was able really to put it together. So, when you're writing about things you really care about, it's easier to write about them than when you're writing about things that are like pulling teeth. Yeah.
I understand that. I've done both kinds of projects.
Yeah.
My goal is that everyone reads your whole book. But for those who don't, what are your major takeaways for us?
Yeah. So there are a couple of, let me just highlight maybe three of the chapters that I think are the sort of most interesting. One was a chapter that I did not include in the book proposal initially because it just never occurred to me. But one of the outside reviewers said, you ought to talk about victimhood generally. And in our society today, you can see in the political discussion that people are trying to present themselves as victims to gain some kind of political advantage. And if you look at the psychological studies, perceiving yourself as a victim is not healthy. And so I just question the whole victimhood status. In fact, feminists now are importantly raising the question whether rape victims should see themselves as victims or survivors, because psychologically it's much better to see yourself as having done something self-actualizing rather than having been a victim. That's one chapter that I thought is particularly important. I circle back to victim impact statements and raise four major concerns about them. One, that the victim impact evidence, as it's applied consistent with the Supreme Court, violates core principles of the criminal law. You can end up having greater punishment, not based on the culpability of the offender, but simply the random nature that the victim's family is articulate and comes forward and presents evidence where another victim's family might not. It also has a racial impact. I work through the way in which it works to create a racial disparity in the death penalty. It tends to increase criminal sentencing. And then finally, the fourth thing that I find troubling about victim impact statements is the false claim that victims are going to receive closure if they come forward and testify. We know that victims and their families may be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. A one-off in court where you can tell the victimizer that he's an SOB, that's not recognized treatment for PTSD. And the other chapter that I think people really should pay attention to is, what do you do if you really care about victims? I realized when I would talk to people, they would often think I was unsympathetic to victims. Not so. I define victims a little bit more broadly. I see some people who are victimizers, and I know from work I've done in the death penalty area You don't become a victimizer without having had horrible experiences. And so I argue in the last chapter that really fine mental health care, a universal health care system, would help create fewer victimizers because they'll get treatment at the front end, and then broad health care available for people who are criminal victims to get them the help they need. And then I take on access to weapons. If we really care about victims, we take weapons out of the hands of a lot of people. More people die as suicides than from homicide. And those people are suffering mental health care crises. So let's care about victims. Let's get a universal health care system. And let's do something about gun violence.
Let me ask you a couple of follow-up questions. So why do you think this idea of confronting the victimizer in court has had so much salience? Like, how did this become such a powerful part of our discourse?
Well, its origins go back to the 1960s. Frank Carrington was one of the law and order lawyers who really led the charge. It was taken up by the Reagan administration. There is a kind of a powerful, the idea that we want to take back control. I get it. You really do. You're angry. You really are. And so I think it has a kind of emotional appeal. But very often we know emotional appeals, when we actually follow through, we kind of think, oh, gee, I blew up. Did it do me any good? No, or maybe, but I think it's overrated. And it seems very attractive. There are a lot of ideas that people who are not expert in the criminal law don't fully understand. Someone's mentally ill and kills, well, that person is delusional. Should we punish that person? I think there's this kind of intuitive sense. Somebody's done something bad. Harm has occurred. Therefore, we have to punish. That's torts. You go and you compensate victims. So I think it's got appeal kind of in a very gut emotional level. Like I get even with the SOB. But when you think it through, it's a false promise. That's part of the problem with making public policy with headlines.
Mm-hmm. And that's how we also ended up with the 3 strikes.
You bet. You bet.
It seems to me that it's like almost at the intersection of the victims' rights movement and the sloganeering of, well, 3 strikes, we know what that is. It's baseball.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I talked to people, 72% of the people voted for 3 strikes. And I would talk to people who had voted for it, and I'd describe what they had actually voted for. And they would suddenly say, oh, my God, I voted for that. Again, we make public policy with headlines, and we end up with bad public policy. Excessive punishment. We've spent billions of dollars not for social protection, destroyed families, gave false hope to victims' families. Bad public policy. There's a rejection of expertise in all of this, too. Democracy doesn't work that well when we're talking about certain kinds of controversial issues. The length of sentences. People don't fully understand whether you need a 5-year sentence or a lifetime sentence or probation to protect the public. That's a very sophisticated question. It's a little bit like the Fed and making sure that we don't allow politics to determine interest rates. We need professional expertise to be a buffer between the hue and cry. Seems quite anti-democratic, but there are certain areas where democratic values just don't work very well.
For at least mass.
That's right. That's right. I mean, again, there is a lot today. You just, you look at the way in which there's an attack on universities. There is hostility towards expertise. Criminal justice policy, we ought to at least be deferential to experts in criminal justice rather than just having mass sentiment take control.
And especially where other countries, particularly in Western Europe, have so much greater results in terms of their carceral processes.
Yeah, you look at prison systems where they don't treat prisoners as animals, you get better results. You treat someone like a human being, you get better results. You have healthcare policies in place, you get better results. You have fewer guns available. You have fewer deaths. And these are sensible ideas that run counter to powerful interest groups.
So there was one other piece of it that I think is really interesting, the paradox of the fact that so many victimizers were themselves victims before they became victimizers.
Yeah.
So there's almost the sense of that we are focused so much on the victims they victimized, and we lose the fact that this is a human who came into their crime having been themselves criminal victims.
Yeah. No, I never handled a death penalty case on my own. I was, as an academic, there would never have been enough time and resources. It's a highly sophisticated area, but I've done some work as part of larger teams in death penalty cases. And you read the profile of the person who has done the killing, and you can start to understand that person was a victim, him, herself. An area where I talk about it in the book is Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter. And at one point, there were considered to be 28 victims, and the local community rang 28 bells to signal the 28 victims. They started then to do 27 because they treated him as not a victim. And then they did 26 because they treated the mom as not a victim, even though he killed him. But if you read the psychological profile of Adam Lanza, you start to realize that this was profound mental illness. And whatever demons, whatever sources for that mental illness was, I don't know. But if you have no empathy for that, then I don't think you really understand human nature, frankly. I think you just see the world in good versus evil, and I don't see that as the way in which the world works. I think we're all capable of good and bad, even both of us.
So, folks, the book is The Victims' Rights Movement, What It Gets Right and What It Gets Wrong. Great read. And for a law professor book, it's not a very long read. Thank you so much for listening. And I look forward to coming to you again with another faculty scholarship conversation.
Good. Thank you.